In the 1980s, a group of petroleum engineers cracked one of the hardest problems in the oil business: how to extract heavy oil that's thicker than molasses from formations thousands of feet underground. Today, that technology is proven, scalable, and profitable. Yet, Venezuela, sitting on 304 billion barrels of the heaviest crude on Earth, is producing less than 900,000 barrels per day. The technology works. So what failed? In the next 5 minutes, you'll discover who the pioneers were that invented thermal recovery methods that are still used today, and why a technique called SAGD can recover 70% of oil that older methods left behind, and what Venezuela's collapse reveals about the difference between possessing technology and deploying it. I'm Mark Roach, petroleum engineer, 30 years across global projects, deal maker, technical workshop leader. Some people call me an oil man. Now, one of my mentors knew these pioneers personally. I'll tell you about that. This is FutureWise Energy, where we connect engineering breakthroughs to market reality. Thomas Boberg, he was an Exxon engineer. He published the definitive text on thermal oil recovery in 1988. His work synthesized decades of field trials into systemic frameworks that companies still reference today. He worked alongside my mentor, Lou Powers, as an independent consultant, Houston-based network across the industry's elite. These weren't abstract academics. They were operators solving real problems in California, Canada, and Venezuela. Here's the challenge they faced. Heavy oil, anything below 20 degrees API gravity, is viscous. At reservoir temperature, it barely moves. Conventional drilling punches a hole, drops a pump, and pulls oil to the surface. Well, that works for light crude in Texas or the North Sea. It doesn't work in heavy oil. Now, the breakthrough insight came in the 1950s in California's Kern River field. Heat reduces viscosity. Inject steam into the formation, heat the surrounding rock and oil, and suddenly the oil flows. That principle, thermal recovery, became the foundation for every heavy oil technique developed since. The first commercial success was cyclic steam stimulation, or CSS, industry slang huff and puff. If you inject high temperature steam, 600 to 640 degree Fahrenheit steam, into a well for weeks, then you shut it in, let it soak for days, then you reverse flow and produce the heated oil from the same well, and then you just repeat that cycle, maybe 15 times over a well's life. Imperial Oil perfected CSS at Cold Lake in Alberta. Pilot tests, well, they started in the mid-1960s. Full commercial operations launched by 1985. By 1991, Cold Lake was producing 90,000 barrels per day, but CSS had limits. Initial recovery estimates of 13% of oil in place. Refinements pushed that to 30%, still leaving 70% behind. And that limitation drove the next breakthrough. In the 1970s, Dr. Roger Butler, a chemical engineer at Imperial Oil, invented steam-assisted gravity drainage, SAGD. The concept: drilled two horizontal wells parallel to each other. One sits 4 to 6 meters directly above the other, injects steam continuously into the upper well. The steam rises, creating a growing steam chamber that heats oil above it. Heated oil drains by gravity into the lower production well beneath it. So unlike CSS, SAGD runs continuously, no cycling, stable pressure, predictable flow rates, and crucially, 60 to 80% recovery in suitable reservoirs. Double CSS performance. Butler's idea was elegant, but the 1970s, nobody could drill precise horizontal wells cheaply. Directional drilling technology just wasn't there yet, so SAGD sat on the shelf. By the late 1990s, horizontal drilling became routine. Cenovus Energy commercialized SAGD at Foster Creek in 2001. That project provided the economics. Within a decade, SAGD became the standard for Canadian oil sands. Today, Canadian Natural Resources is drilling CSS pads at Primrose and SAGD pads at Kirby. ConocoPhillips operates SAGD at Surmont, over 150,000 barrels per day. The technology works at scale. Boberg documented the science. Boberg invented the breakthrough. Powers and others networked the knowledge across the energy. The engineering problem was solved by the late 1980s. So why is Venezuela failing? Venezuela's Orinoco Belt holds an estimated 1.2 trillion barrels of oil in place. Okay, 1.2 trillion barrels of oil in place versus the 300 billion that you're hearing on the headlines today, which are classified as recoverable. So this Orinoco Belt has an estimated 1.2 trillion barrels of oil in place. Now, most of that oil is between 8 and 16 degrees API. That's extra heavy. That's thicker than water. And in some zones like Junin, it's 8 to 9 degrees API, practically solid at room temperature. So to produce it, you need one of these two approaches: thermal recovery, CSS or SAGD. Inject steam, heat the oil, produce it. Or dilution, blend it with lighter crude or condensate so it flows through pipelines. Both approaches require energy, capital, maintenance, and most critically, skilled operators who understand the process. Venezuela had that expertise back in the 1990s. I was down there. I was working with them. Foreign operators like ExxonMobil, Chevron, Total, got it right that time. ConocoPhillips. Well, they brought thermal recovery knowledge from Canada and California. They trained Venezuelan engineers. I was part of some of those teams. Production climbed. But then the policy changed. Foreign companies were squeezed out or expropriated. Many engineers left. The ones who stayed they were working with aging equipment, irregular budgets, and deteriorating infrastructure. PDVSA, PDVSA, they estimate that it would cost, now get this, $8 billion just to restore pipeline infrastructure to late 1990s condition. And they estimate that the total rehabilitation cost is $110 to $250 billion over the next decade. But here's what's happening now in January 2026. U.S. pressure and maritime blockades have forced PDVSA to shut wells. Orinoco Belt production dropped 25% in 2 weeks, from 663 barrels per day to 498,000 barrels per day by late December. Storage tanks, well, they're full. Export tankers won't load due to these sanctions risks. Diluent supplies, which is light crude needed for blending, well, those supplies have been disrupted. I think they were coming from Russia. PDVSA is prioritizing shutdowns of the heaviest crude first. Junin region wells, which are 8 to 9 degree API crude, they're closing. Ayacucho and Carabobo follow. Lighter crude zones stay operational as long as possible. The technology to produce this oil exists. SAGD works. CSS works. Dilution works. The geology is understood. What's failed is operational continuity, the institutional knowledge, supply chains, trained workforce, and capital discipline required to execute thermal recovery at scale over decades. JP Morgan estimates Venezuelan production could reach 2.5 million barrels per day over the next decade with proper investment and sanctions relief. Wood Mackenzie suggests 2 million barrels per day within a year or two if companies with heavy oil expertise like ConocoPhillips return. But that assumes stable governance, contract enforcement, supply chain restoration, and restaffing with engineers who understand thermal recovery operations. Technology is necessary. It's not sufficient. Thomas Boberg, Roger Butler, Lou Powers, and their generation solved the engineering problem. They proved you could produce oil that's so heavy that it resembles asphalt, CSS, SAGD, horizontal drilling, steam injection. These aren't experimental, they're mature, proven, profitable. But engineering breakthroughs don't maintain themselves. SAGD wells need continuous steam injection. CSS cycles require precise timing. Upgraders need maintenance. Pipelines need inspection. Operators need training. Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves. It has access to the technology. What it lacks is the operational discipline to deploy that technology year after year without interruption. Markets focus on barrels per day. Engineers focus on uptime, maintenance schedules, training programs. When those systems break, production collapses, no matter how good the geology or how proven the technology. That's the lesson here. Resources don't produce themselves. Technology doesn't run itself. Operations matter. Execution matters. Institutional continuity matters. If you're evaluating energy investments, whether it's in Venezuela, Canada, or elsewhere, don't just ask, do they have the reserves? Ask, do they have the people, the systems, and the discipline required to execute for the next 20 years straight? Because oil in the ground only becomes revenue when operators show up every day and do the work. I'm Mark Roach, and this is FutureWise Energy.